Welcome to Sound Doctrine.
I was actually just thinking about that metaphor we discussed before we started recording.
Oh, right. Yeah, the lottery ticket one.
Hmm.
Imagine holding, like, a winning lottery ticket, and it guarantees absolute security for the rest of your life.
Right. Total financial freedom.
Exactly. But you can't cash it in because your hands are shaking just way too violently to actually hand it over to the teller.
It's such a devastating image, isn't it?
Yeah, you're vibrating with so much anxiety, so much agitation that you are physically incapable of receiving the payout that is literally already yours.
And that, according to the 17th century thinker we're looking at today, that is exactly what we are doing to ourselves spiritually every single day.
Yeah, the idea that the cure, the relief, mercy is just sitting right there on the counter.
But our own internal chaos totally prevents the transaction.
It fundamentally shifts the blame for our unrest. Because today, our mission for this deep dive is to work our way through Chapter 4 of Jeremiah Burroughs' classic work, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment.
Which is just, honestly, such a dense, beautiful book.
It really is. And we're focusing specifically today on his arguments regarding the quote-unquote excellence of contentment.
Right. And we're coming to this, and we want you to know this. We're not historians summarizing a textbook here.
No, not at all.
We are just two people who've been sitting with these pages, chewing on the concepts, and trying to figure out how they actually apply to the relentless hum of modern life.
Yeah, so we want to invite you to pull up a chair and just process this with us.
Because up to this point in his work, Burroughs has primarily been defining what contentment is,
Right, like mapping out the mystery of how a believer actually learns it.
Exactly. But here, he kind of pivots. He begins to outline the intrinsic, almost staggering value of possessing this mindset.
And he anchors this entire argument on the Apostle Paul's words.
Yes, in Philippians 4:11, where Paul says, I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content.
Okay, let's stop right there on that word, learned.
That's a huge word.
Because Paul was not born with this. It wasn't just some innate personality trait.
Precisely. Burroughs observes that Paul speaks of this as a hard-won, beautiful, deeply valuable lesson.
Like a massive relief.
Yeah, it's as if Paul is letting out this profound sigh of relief, effectively saying, blessed be God that I have learned this lesson.
Because contentment isn't just a survival mechanism for when things go wrong.
Right. It's not just gritting your teeth and bearing the pain of life until things somehow get better.
It has this intrinsic standalone excellence to it.
Which implies that before he learned it, he was basically in agony.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It implies that the absence of contentment is a state of internal torture.
So discovering it is like finding the cure to a disease you didn't even realize was slowly killing you.
Exactly. But if we view contentment as this excellent hard-won lesson, we kind of have to look at the practical implications.
Which Burroughs just comes out swinging with right away. His first major argument is a total paradigm shatterer.
It really is.
Yeah.
He argues that contentment fundamentally redefines true worship.
Yeah, he draws this sharp line between external acts of worship and what he calls, I love this phrase, soul worship.
And to understand the weight of that, we have to consider his context.
Right, 17th century England.
Yeah, this is a society where external religious observance was completely woven into the fabric of everyday life.
Like attending a sermon, spending an hour in prayer, observing the Sabbath.
Right, those were the standard, accepted metrics of a devout life. But Burroughs argues that those are merely the outer shell.
The measurable metrics. And human beings love measurable metrics, right? Because we can track them.
Oh, absolutely. Give me a checklist any day.
Right. Like I can put a check mark next to read my Bible for 20 minutes or attended the Sunday service.
But Burroughs says those are just external acts.
So what is the internal counterpart then?
The soul's worship. Burroughs defines this as the internal subjection of the heart to God.
Okay, internal subjection.
Yeah, and he makes this audacious claim that you actually worship God more by possessing a quiet, contented spirit in the face of adversity.
Wow.
Than you do when you are checking off all those external religious boxes.
Wait, let me push back on that, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Saying that a quiet spirit is better than an hour of prayer feels dangerously close to saying we don't need spiritual disciplines at all.
Right, like as long as we're just generally chill.
Exactly. Like, how does Burroughs keep this from becoming a convenient excuse for spiritual laziness? Because it's very easy for someone to say, well, I didn't go to church or pray today, but I have a contented spirit, so, I'm offering soul worship.
That is a really critical distinction to make. Burroughs is definitely not advocating for a passive, apathetic spiritual life where you just abandon discipline.
Okay, good.
What he is doing is warning against the hypocrisy of decoupling the external discipline from the internal posture.
Got it.
And he uses this very specific, somewhat archaic word to describe the opposite of this soul worship. He calls it being froward.
Froward. F-R-O-W-A-R-D.
Yes, froward. It basically means to be stubbornly contrary, complaining, difficult to deal with, constantly murmuring.
Okay, I know some froward people. I might be one sometimes.
I think we all are. But Burroughs' point is that if you do your hour of prayer in the morning, but then you spend the remaining 23 hours of the day in a froward state.
Like snapping at your family, resenting your job.
Exactly. Bitterly complaining about your circumstances. He says God does not regard that earlier hour of prayer as true worship.
Because the baseline operating system of your entire day is actually rebellion.
Precisely. Because if worship is fundamentally about acknowledging God's worth, right? His wisdom, his sovereignty over your life.
Then chronic murmuring and discontentment are basically declarations of anti-worship.
Exactly. When you are froward, you are essentially telling the universe, the way God is managing my life right now is incompetent.
Ouch. That hits hard.
It does. You cannot sing hymns declaring the infinite wisdom of the Creator and then spend the rest of the week in a state of resentful agitation over the exact circumstances he has ordained for you and still call that a life of worship.
Man, I struggle to reconcile that with how easily we excuse our own irritability today.
Oh, we completely excuse it.
We have totally normalized low-grade agitation. We call it venting.
Right, I just need to vent.
We view complaining as a fundamental human right, almost a therapeutic necessity.
But Burroughs is framing it as a direct theological affront.
He really is.
And if we look at the neurological equivalent of what the Puritans called murmuring, we see it everywhere today.
Oh, totally. We are a culture of perpetual grievance.
We doom scroll to find things to be outraged about.
Yes. We cultivate dissatisfaction because our entire consumer economy literally relies on us feeling like we lack something.
And Burroughs is suggesting that this cultural habit isn't just bad for our mental health. It is actively severing our ability to offer soul worship.
So how do you and I, and how do you listening right now, actually evaluate our own soul worship?
Because if the metric isn't the calendar or the attendance record, the evaluation gets much, much harder.
Right. We have to evaluate our reactions in the crucible of daily frustrations.
True soul worship is proven in the micro moments of friction.
Like when the Wi-Fi drops out 30 seconds before a crucial video presentation.
Exactly. Or when you get cut off in traffic and spill coffee all over your shirt.
Or, on a much heavier, more profound scale, when a medical test comes back with terrifying results.
Yeah.
Or when a relationship you poured your soul into suddenly just ends.
Right. How does your internal landscape react in those moments? Does it violently riot, or does it eventually find a way to bow?
Burroughs is basically telling us that the person who can maintain a quiet, submissive frame of spirit in the wake of a shattered expectation,
that person is offering a higher, purer form of worship than someone who prays eloquently in public but shatters at the first sign of inconvenience.
It totally reframes the mundane frustrations of life. They are no longer just senseless annoyances getting in the way of our quote-unquote real spiritual lives.
No, they are the very curriculum of our spiritual lives.
They are pop quizzes in soul worship.
I love that. Pop quizzes in soul worship.
And that internal posture, it doesn't just change how we honor God, it fundamentally alters how we are actually able to receive anything we are asking him for.
Which moves us past simply honoring God into the actual mechanics of how a human being interacts with divine grace. Right. This is where Burroughs argues that those who are contented are uniquely fitted to receive mercy.
And he uses this illustration of a shaking vessel.
Yes, this brings us back to that idea of the shaking hands and the lottery ticket we mentioned at the start.
Okay, unpack that vessel metaphor for us.
So Burroughs says, imagine you have a vessel, a cup, and someone is trying to pour a precious, highly valuable liquid into it.
Right.
What is the absolute, non-negotiable physical requirement for that transfer to happen successfully?
The vessel has to be held still.
Exactly. If the cup is shaking violently up and down, vibrating with agitation, the liquid is going to spill everywhere. It would be totally wasted.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this because it is an incredibly convicting diagnostic for the modern condition.
It really is. We are a vibrating people.
We are constantly refreshing our inboxes, endlessly checking analytics, pacing the floor, mentally running through 1,000 catastrophic worst-case
And
scenarios.
simultaneously, we are praying, God, give me peace, give me direction, give me mercy.
But we are shaking the cup.
The implication here is just profound. Burroughs is suggesting that God's mercy might be entirely available. It might be ready to be poured out right this very second.
But we are structurally incapable of receiving it in our current state of frenetic agitation.
The delay is not on God's end. The delay is on ours. The vessel is actively rejecting the pour.
So the obvious question here is, how does a modern, vibrating, anxious person actually hold their vessel still?
Because it's not easy.
No, if my career's in jeopardy or my child is sick, I can't just flip a switch and say, okay, I'm holding still now.
Right.
The shaking feels totally involuntary.
Right. It feels like it's just happening to you.
Yeah.
But it requires a deliberate cognitive reframing, which is exactly what Burroughs means by learning contentment.
Okay, so how do we learn it in that moment?
To stop the vessel from shaking, you have to trace the agitation down to its root. Why are you shaking?
Usually it's because I'm desperately trying to maintain an illusion of control.
Exactly. You believe that if you just worry enough, if you just run enough mental simulations, you can somehow protect yourself from the outcome you fear.
It's like worrying is a superstitious form of control. If I agonize over this, I'm somehow managing it.
Yes. Holding the vessel still means consciously surrendering that illusion. It is the theological grounding in God's sovereignty.
So it's saying, I cannot control this outcome, but I trust the character of the one who does.
It involves a type of cognitive diffusion, accepting the presence of fearful thoughts without allowing them to drive your spiritual posture into a frenzy.
Wow.
When you surrender the need to control the outcome, the shaking begins to subside. And only then can the mercy actually gather in the cup.
And he pairs this shaking vessel illustration with a second one that hits even closer to home. The crying child.
The forward crying child.
Oh boy.
Burroughs asks us to imagine a child throwing a violent tantrum. They are kicking, screaming, and weeping for a specific toy or a treat.
Okay.
A wise parent, and he specifies not an indulgent parent, but a wise one does not hand the child the toy while they are in the middle of a fit.
Because that teaches the child that screaming is the currency you use to purchase your desires. It reinforces the rebellion.
Right. And here is the theological gut punch Burroughs delivers with this.
I'm bracing myself.
He notes that even if the parent fully intends to give the child the gift, like the parent bought it, wrapped it, and wants to give it, they will wait.
Oh.
The wise parent deliberately withholds the intended gift until the child stops kicking, comes to them, stands still, and is quiet and contented without it.
And then they get it.
Then, and only then, do they receive it.
That is a bitter pill to swallow when we apply it to our own lives.
Very bitter.
I mean, we can easily see the wisdom of this when we're dealing with a toddler in a grocery store, right?
Well, yeah, everyone judges the parent at caves.
Right. But it is incredibly difficult to accept that God might be utilizing that exact same parenting mechanic on us.
Because we think we're adults who know what we need.
To think that God might be deliberately withholding a desired outcome, like a job promotion we are desperate for, a spouse, a financial breakthrough, a physical healing, specifically because we are throwing a spiritual tantrum about it.
It forces us to really examine the theology of idolatry. Well, if you are deeply discontented, if your internal dialogue is essentially saying to God, I cannot function, I cannot be happy, and I absolutely refuse to be at peace unless you give me this one specific thing, you have just turned that thing into an idol.
You have elevated a created thing above the creator.
And God, operating as a perfectly loving father, will often refuse to feed an idol. He will withhold the object of your obsession until you learn to be content with him alone.
So it's the difference between punishment and loving discipline.
Exactly. The withholding isn't punitive, it's corrective.
He isn't saying you were bad so you don't get the toy. He's saying this toy is currently destroying your ability to relate to me properly. I have to wait until you value me more than the toy.
Which brings us back to that self-audit you mentioned earlier. We have to look at the areas in our lives where we are desperately, frantically pleading with God.
We have to ask ourselves, are you a shaking vessel?
Are you delaying the arrival of your own mercy because you absolutely refuse to relinquish control?
Are you the kicking toddler, demanding that God act on your timeline and according to your exact specifications?
By refusing to be still, you may actually be forcing a loving God to wait.
But, quietness isn't just passive receptivity. I mean, if a vessel just sits there holding still forever, the water eventually grows stagnant.
Right. We aren't just meant to sit in a room doing nothing.
Exactly. What happens when that quiet soul actually has to go out into a chaotic, hostile world and do something? How does contentment function when we are under pressure to perform?
Well, this is where Burroughs introduces his next point. He argues that contentment is the very thing that makes us fit to do service.
Okay, fit for service.
He taps into this foundational principle of physics and philosophy here.
Mhm.
Nothing moves effectively unless it has something immovable upholding it.
So to be highly active and effective on the outside, you must be utterly stable on the inside.
Yes. And Burroughs uses the imagery of a horse-drawn coach, right? A carriage navigating the rough, unpaved roads of the 17th century.
Which were terribly bumpy, I'm sure. Oh, awful. So the wheels are constantly moving up and down. They are dropping into massive ruts, bouncing over rocks, taking the brunt of the terrain. But the axle tree, the solid axle that connects those wheels and supports the entire weight of the carriage, it remains completely immovably steady.
Exactly. If the axle were to bounce with the same violent frequency as the wheels, the carriage would literally tear itself to pieces. It would shatter.
Because the structural integrity of a moving vehicle depends entirely on a core that does not share in the chaos of the perimeter.
Right.
Let me test an original analogy on you because I feel like this concept is so vital for a modern audience.
Let's hear it.
It's kind of like the gyroscope on a commercial airplane.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
A plane can be flying through a Category 4 hurricane, getting battered by intense turbulence, violently dropping in altitude, but deep inside the avionics system, that internal gyroscope remains perfectly mathematically level.
It does not tilt with the wind.
Exactly. And because it remains level, it provides the fixed reference point that allows the autopilot to make the micro corrections needed to keep the plane in the sky.
That is such a good picture.
If the gyroscope panics and aligns with the storm, the plane crashes. Contentment is the soul's gyroscope.
That is a perfect modern mapping of Burroughs' point. If you are going to navigate the turbulence of life in this fallen world, you must have a steady heart within you.
Right.
Those who have unsteady, disturbed, bouncing spirits, those who align their internal state with the external storm, they are simply not fit to do service for God because they cannot bear any weight.
I want to pause here, though, and challenge this because it flies directly in the face of modern hustle culture and, frankly, modern activism.
It really does.
Today, we often believe that we need to be emotionally fired up, anxious, agitated, or even fiercely angry in order to, change the world.
We use our discontentment, our grievance, as the primary fuel for our service.
Right. We assume that if someone is calm, they must be apathetic. Like if you aren't outwardly stressing about the project at work, you aren't dedicated. So does Burroughs just want a compliant, passive society that never fights for change?
Not at all. And this is where we have to understand what an axle tree actually does.
Okay.
An axle tree is not passive. It bears the entire weight of the carriage and its passengers. It enables forward motion through hostile, difficult terrain.
It's doing massive work.
Huge work.
Yeah.
Burroughs is diagnosing a critical weakness in how we operate. We conflate frenetic anxiety with passion.
Wow, yes, we do.
We think that a disturbed spirit is a sign of deep care, but an unsteady spirit is actually a massive liability.
Because if your internal spirit is bouncing up and down like the wheels, you have no axle tree. You will shake yourself to pieces. You're just going to burn out.
Exactly. When you are driven by a disturbed, anxious spirit, your service becomes erratic. It becomes self-serving, easily offended, and quickly derailed by the very first rut in the road.
You spend all your energy managing your own emotional turbulence rather than actually doing the work.
This is why Burroughs notes that when the Lord has a great, heavy work for one of his servants to do, he usually quiets their spirits first.
God doesn't recruit the frantic. He stabilizes them, and then he uses them.
The quietness of the heart is the prerequisite for the heavy lifting of the hands. I mean, think about the most effective, enduring leaders in history.
The ones who actually changed the world didn't do it by projecting chaos.
Right, they did it by projecting an unshakable, centered resolve in the face of chaos.
So the practical application for you, the listener, is to figure out how to become the axle tree in your specific environment.
Because your workplace is always going to be chaotic.
Always. The wheels are going to bounce. Your coworkers are going to panic over quarterly earnings. Your children are going to have emotional crises. The economy is going to fluctuate. The wheels are constantly hitting rocks.
But the contented Christian is meant to provide the structural integrity for the people around them.
So when the office is in a complete uproar over a lost account, the contented person is the axle tree.
Yes, they are immovable, not
Yeah.
because they don't care about the company, but because their ultimate peace and identity are not tied to that specific account.
And that detachment is what actually allows them to be effective.
Precisely.
Because they aren't panicked, they can think clearly, act wisely, and formulate a strategy while everyone else is just spinning out. They can bear the weight of the crisis because they aren't shifting beneath it.
But if we move from the external mechanics of service to the internal psychological reality, we kind of have to ask, what does it actually feel like to live this way?
Right.
If you are worshiping truly, receiving mercy quietly, and serving steadily, what is the internal texture of your daily life?
This leads perfectly to Burroughs' arguments about the abundant comforts of contentment.
He makes the case that contentment makes a person's life exceedingly sweet.
Exceedingly sweet. I love that.
And the reason for this sweetness is that the believer's comfort becomes completely independent of what the Puritans called the creatures.
Okay, we should definitely define that term because it's so central to Puritan theology.
Right, they don't just mean animals.
No. When Burroughs talks about creatures, he relies on the Augustinian framework of ordered loves. Creatures basically means anything created.
It encompasses money, social status, physical health, careers, relationships, houses, reputation.
Literally anything that is not the creator himself.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And human misery usually stems from disordered loves, expecting a created thing to provide a level of satisfaction that only the creator can actually provide.
Burroughs gives a brilliantly incisive psychological observation here regarding how we interact with these created things. He warns us against being like, get this coy and dainty, children.
It is such a descriptive, almost humorous phrase, coy and dainty.
But the underlying psychology is deadly serious.
It is. He points out that if you have a fussy, dainty, demanding child, and you finally cave and satisfy their intense desire for one specific toy or sweet, it does not actually produce a contented child.
It just upgrades their baseline.
Exactly. It just prepares them to be fussy and demanding about the next slightly better thing they want.
Their capacity for discontentment hasn't been cured. The tumor hasn't been removed. It is simply relocated to a new object.
We are intimately familiar with this today. It is the hedonic treadmill mapped out centuries before modern psychology gave it a name.
If I just get this promotion, I'll finally be able to relax.
You get the promotion? 2 weeks later, the euphoria fades, and your brain says, well, if I just get the corner office, then I'll be happy.
If I hit the salary bracket, if my kid gets into this specific school, we just endlessly move the goalposts of our own peace.
Burroughs makes a vital theological distinction here to expose the flaw in that operating system. He says that if you become content merely by having your specific desires satisfied, like you wanted a new house, you bought the house, and now you feel at peace.
That is not Christian contentment.
No, that is merely self-love. You just love yourself and are pleased that the universe temporarily aligned with your preferences.
Which is an incredibly fragile state to live in because the universe rarely aligns with our preferences for very long.
Right. But true love to God, he argues, is being happy with his disposal, whatever it is.
Wow.
When your contentment is generated by the grace of God operating within your heart, it prepares you to be contented in all conditions, not just the condition where you got your way.
You bypass the hedonic treadmill entirely because your comfort is sourced in the Creator, who never changes, rather than the creature which is constantly degrading.
To illustrate this abundant, independent comfort, Burroughs reaches back to Deuteronomy 33:7, which details the blessing of Judah.
And the text there simply says, let his hands be sufficient for him.
Yes. Burroughs applies this conceptually to contentment. A contented person has a sufficiency of their own given by God.
When God gives you a sufficiency within your own soul, so that you aren't desperately clawing at the outside world for validation, security, or peace.
You have been given an incomprehensible blessing.
You are no longer an emotional hostage to your circumstances.
And this leads to a highly provocative phrase from the text, something that I had to read it 3 times just to wrap my head around it.
Oh, I know the exact phrase you're talking about. Burroughs writes this instruction: be contented with your contentment.
It sounds like a riddle, but it is a radical economic theory of the soul.
It really is. Be contented with your contentment. He imagines a person looking at all the tangible things they lack. Maybe you don't have the financial portfolio your peers have, or you are battling a chronic health issue, or you don't have the social influence you wish you did.
Right. And instead of mourning those absences, Burroughs urges you to look at your own internal state and say, I lack those created things, but blessed be God, I have a quiet, contented heart that others do not have.
He is challenging the believer to view the grace of contentment itself as a massive, tangible asset.
It is not just the absence of complaining. It is the presence of a treasure.
We usually think of peace of mind as the byproduct of having enough wealth. Burroughs flips the equation entirely. He is saying that peace of mind is the wealth.
Yes. If you have $10 million in the bank, but your soul is churning with anxiety, paranoia, and a restless greed for more, you are utterly impoverished.
But if you have very little in your bank account, but you possess the rare jewel of a contented spirit, you are incredibly rich.
You currently possess the exact psychological state that the frantic millionaire is futilely trying to buy.
Burroughs calls possessing this quiet spirit a rich portion, and he goes so far as to describe it as even a heaven on earth.
When you are freed from the tyranny of constantly needing your circumstances to be perfectly aligned in order to be okay, you experience a taste of heavenly freedom right here in the present, amidst the decay and the difficulty of a fallen world.
So the challenge for you listening is to fundamentally reframe your net worth.
The next time you find yourself wishing for a better situation, or looking with envy at someone else's carefully curated highlight reel online, pause and recognize the staggering asset you hold if you have peace.
Be contented with your contentment. Realize that a quiet spirit is a far rarer and more valuable commodity than whatever is sitting in your neighbor's driveway.
And if contentment is truly a heaven on earth, as Burroughs claims, then we must confront the final, towering theological reality of this chapter.
Right, because this isn't just a psychological trick for stress reduction.
No, this isn't just cognitive behavioral therapy dressed up in 17th century language. This is deeply, inextricably connected to the very nature of God himself.
This brings us to argument 10. The soul comes to an excellence near to God himself.
This is the climax of the chapter, and it is a massive, almost intimidating claim.
How does learning to be content with a modest income or a delayed flight bring a human soul nearer to the excellence of the divine?
To understand this, we have to drill down into the linguistics and the philosophy of the ancient world. The word translated as content in Philippians 4:11, the lesson Paul learned, is the Greek word autarks. Literally, it signifies a self-sufficiency.
Now wait, self-sufficiency in a Christian context immediately sets off alarm bells for me.
I can see why.
That sounds like Stoicism. The Stoic philosophers, like Seneca or Marcus Aurelius, prized autarks. Their goal was to become entirely self-reliant, to shrink their desires down to nothing so that the outside world couldn't hurt them.
Right, they wanted to be unbothered islands of rational thought.
So is Burroughs just importing Stoic philosophy and baptizing it?
That is the crucial tension, and the answer is absolutely not.
Okay, good. How are they different?
The Stoic achieves autarks by amputating their desires and relying entirely on their own human willpower. It is an inward collapse.
Got it.
But Christian contentment is an outward expansion. For a human, true self-sufficiency is impossible in a vacuum. We are created dependent beings. But God's great glory is that he is entirely, eternally happy and self-sufficient in himself. He needs nothing outside of the Trinity to be complete, joyful, and at peace.
God does not suffer from lack. He does not need the universe to exist in order to be fulfilled.
Exactly. Burroughs points out that one of the ancient Hebrew names for God is El Shaddai, which roughly translates to God having sufficiency in himself.
God is the all-sufficient one.
The fountain of his joy is entirely internal. So when a Christian learns the art of contentment, they are not practicing Stoic detachment. They are, by grace, stepping into a reflection of that divine self-sufficiency.
Because the believer's sufficiency is not sourced in their own willpower. The believer is sufficient because El Shaddai resides in their soul.
Yes.
We have everything we need within us, precisely and only because we have God within us. We are not an island. We are a peninsula connected to an infinite mainland.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The Stoic wants to feel nothing so they cannot be hurt. The contented Christian feels deeply, but their ultimate satisfaction is anchored in an infinite object, God himself, so that when lesser finite objects are taken away, their core remains unshattered.
Wow.
By learning Christian contentment, the believer is actually partaking in the divine nature.
We're mirroring the self-sufficiency and the unshakable peace of the Creator.
Exactly. When the world is chaotic, when the economy is crashing, when the diagnosis is grim, and you remain anchored in the sufficiency of God, you are displaying the character of God to a terrified world.
This is the ultimate excellence of contentment. It doesn't just make your life a little smoother or your blood pressure a little lower. It conforms you to the image of God.
It makes you look like your creator.
Yeah.
When you are unaffected by the loss of created things because you are so infinitely full of the Creator, you are operating on a heavenly frequency.
Operating on heavenly frequency, that completely changes how we should view the trials that force us to learn this lesson.
It really does.
If the end result of learning contentment is that we look more like God that we partake in, his self-sufficient peace, then the painful, agonizing curriculum of Philippians 4:11 is entirely worth it.
Learning how to be abased, learning how to suffer need, having our idols stripped away.
Wait, having our idol stripped away is all worth it.
Because it yields the rare
It
jewel.
yields the jewel. As we wrap up this deep guide into Burroughs' 4th chapter, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to take with you into the friction of your coming week.
Building on everything we have unpacked today.
Exactly. I want you to think about the most successful, wealthy, or politically powerful person you know of. Think of the billionaire tech mogul, or the apex politician, or the celebrity who has everything the world says a human being should want.
Now, observe their behavior. Look at how constantly stressed, constantly demanding, and constantly forward they are.
They possess the world, but they are a violently shaking vessel. They have millions in resources, but they are spiritually bankrupt because they are entirely dependent on circumstances going their way.
Now contrast that fragile existence with the quiet structural power of Burroughs' axletree.
The steady, immovable core in the midst of a bumpy road. What if true power isn't the ability to manipulate and buy and force your circumstances to perfectly suit your preferences?
What if true power, divine power, is the ability to be completely peacefully unaffected by them?
That is a profound paradigm shift. We spend our lives trying to control the weather when God is offering us the ability to remain warm regardless of the storm.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into sound doctrine.
As you step back out into the bumps and ruts of your week, we encourage you. Look at the things making you vibrate with anxiety. Relinquish the illusion of control. Practice being the axletree. Practice holding your vessel still. Until next time.